Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. I hope everybody is having a great day so far. We, of course, have a big show for you. The MLB Hall of Fame was announced just about 24 hours ago. We will go over the 3 inductees, as well as a bunch of news surrounding NFL head coaches and GMs. 1 GM hired, 1 head coach hired, 1 GM fired. We'll talk about all of that as well as get into a little bit of NBA news as the trade deadline approaches. But before we get into any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, January 22nd. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the first topic of the day, which is the MLB announcing their Hall of Fame class of 2025. They announced 3 players officially getting inducted: Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner. Ichiro and CC Sabathia were both first ballot Hall of Famers. Billy Wagner gets in on his 10th and final attempt before being kicked off of the ballot. And I think it's really fascinating the way that the Baseball Hall of Fame works, the way that voting works. And it's honestly probably the most intriguing one of all the sports. Of course, you have the Baseball Writers Association of America, or the BBWAA, that makes these decisions of who gets in, but they're anonymous. Unlike a lot of other voting strategies, when the AP puts their stuff out, it eventually becomes public of who voted for what. You can choose to publish your ballots. At the time where everything was announced, we only knew 55% of the public ballots. Of course, at the end of the day, one of the big talks with this is the fact that Ichiro Suzuki, one of the greatest baseball players to ever come over from Japan, probably the best one aside from Shohei Ohtani right now, did not get 100% of the votes. He undeniably was a Hall of Famer. Now, we don't get an explanation for why this guy decided not to vote for Shohei Ohtani, for Ichiro Suzuki. We don't get an explanation for why a guy a couple years ago decided not to vote for Derek Jeter. Both of them were 1 vote away from being unanimously selected into the Hall of Fame. But let's talk about Ichiro for a little bit, because he made history today by being selected to the Hall of Fame, the first ever Japanese player to be named into the MLB Hall of Fame. And his career is something special. Over 3,000 hits. He is a part of the 3,000 hit club. He had a career batting average of over 300, which is incredibly hard to do. One of the best contact hitters in the history of the sport. He won an MVP. He was a 10-time All-Star in his 10 seasons. In 10 seasons, he was a 10-time Gold Glove winner. He won the Rookie of the Year and had over 500 stolen bases. He was a guy that was a true 5-tool player, could do everything that you want him to, and there was not a shot in the dark that he wasn't a Hall of Famer. There, of course, was one guy that decided to uphold the sanctity of baseball or whatever. But what makes this even more impressive is he did all of this at a much shorter timeline than everybody else, than a lot of other players. He comes over to the U.S. at age 27 after playing 7 seasons in the Japan League, winning 3 MVPs over there, a Japan League a Japan series over there, and he was amazing as well as over there as well, obviously coming over to the MLB, but he starts his career late at age 27, and he doesn't miss a beat. He has a Hall of Fame career despite missing 3 or 4 extra seasons that could have pushed him higher on some of these lists than he already is. He's an amazing player, and he absolutely deserved to get in. It bothers me that there was a guy that looked at the ballot this year and said Ichiro Suzuki did not deserve to make the Hall of Fame, because all they do is they get a list of names. They get a list of about 15 or 16 names, and you can pick up to 10 guys. And if the guy gets over 80% of the vote, they are in the Hall of Fame. That's all it takes. It's a pretty simple way of voting. If they get less than 5% of the vote, they're kicked off the ballot, or if they are on the year, if they stay on the ballot for more than 10 years, they're also kicked off the ballot. This was the last year for a guy like Billy Wagner to get in, aside from some extra little ways for a player to get in after they're kicked off of the voting ballot. He finds his way in there, which is really cool to see. A lot of these players don't have the support around them to get it in. Billy Wagner, a guy that absolutely deserved to get into the Hall of Fame. But you just have to pick 10 guys. And if you look at that list, a list that included a bunch of guys that got bopped off, it was a bloated ballot this year. But to look up and down that ballot, to see Ichiro Suzuki's name and say, no, he doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, is a ridiculous statement. It doesn't make any sense, and I don't think that guy should be able to vote for the Baseball Writers of America anymore. It doesn't make sense to hold the sanctity of the game anymore. I know there's baseball purists over there that won't let some guys in because they did steroids, or that's a lot of the baseball writers. They won't let guys in because, or they won't vote for guys because, oh, they don't deserve to be unanimous, or, oh, they don't deserve to be in on their first try. They won't vote them in. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Ichiro Suzuki is a Hall of Famer, and to take him out of the 100% club, which is currently only held by Mariano Rivera, is ridiculous. Again, Derek Jeter didn't even get that honor, who had a very similar situation where one guy did not vote for him at the end of the day with these writers. It doesn't make any sense. I hate it. I don't like the way that they can hide behind their anonymity. I think they should have to explain themselves at a minimum. But aside from Ichiro, who had an amazing career and deserved to get in, you have CC Sabathia. CC Sabathia, of course, a world champion with the Yankees. He won a Cy Young over in Cleveland to start his career. He was second in the Rookie of the Year voting to Ichiro Suzuki when they were both coming into the league. A 6-time All-Star. He has 3,000 strikeouts. That is crazy. Only 19 pitchers in the history of MLB have 3,000 strikeouts. He falls just short of the 300 win club, but 3,000 strikeouts is insane. And that's the reason why he's in, because he's a part of a very exclusive club. Only 18 other guys in the history of the MLB have surpassed that number of strikeouts. He had a long career. He was an amazing pitcher. He's another guy that deserves to get in. If you want to talk about whether he deserves to be first ballot or not, we can have that discussion. But again, in baseball, that's not something that really matters that much. It's not like in the NFL where you have to put 5 guys in. There were years where they didn't let anybody in a couple of times ago. And that gets to my point a little bit about a guy like Billy Wagner. Billy Wagner has been on the ballot a couple times where they didn't let anybody into the Hall. And he wasn't any less deserving of being in the Hall of Fame when they didn't let anybody in. Billy Wagner, one of the best closers in all of baseball. He has 422 career saves. That's good. That's good enough for 8th all-time in the history of the major leagues. He's a 7-time All-Star, was an All-Star with 4 different teams. And this was his last year on the ballot. As I said, a couple years ago, the Baseball Writers Association did not elect a single player to the Hall of Fame. This all while a guy like Billy Wagner was on the list the whole time. Now he finds his way across the finish line, which is good. I'm glad he eventually gets there in the end. He gets the support for guys that believe he should have been in there, but it shouldn't have taken that long, especially in lean years like we've had the last couple of election cycles, right? It hasn't been a lot of guys inducted, and frankly, the MLB is a very small hall kind of sport, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but their voting structure is a little weird, and I think you need to have some accountability, again, for guys like the people or person that didn't vote for Derek Jeter a couple years ago, that didn't vote for Ichiro Suzuki this year. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And if they're doing it because they don't think they belong in there, they just don't deserve to vote for these kind of awards that affect these people's legacies so much, how we look at the game 20, 30 years from now, if they were a Hall of Famer or not. That's a lot of responsibility to have. And if you're trying to uphold the sanctity of baseball by not allowing a guy in or not allowing him to be a 100%er, that's just dumb. It really is. Let us celebrate these players that were amazing and no doubt Hall of Famers. You should be allowed to get 100% of the support. It shouldn't honestly be a rare thing. I don't think it should be. I think there should be more than just one guy in the history of baseball that have ever been unanimously selected, right? There's guys out there that should have been slam dunks. Instead, there's only one, which is fine. Mariano Rivera deserves it, but there's other guys that deserve it as well, and it's not ruining the sport of baseball if other guys get 100% support to make the Hall of Fame by these baseball writers. That's all. That's my 2 cents. All 3 of these guys deserve to get in. I'm glad people are being elected into the Hall of Fame this year because, like I said, there have been years in the past, pretty recently, where they just haven't elected people at all. We'll see what happens, though, in upcoming seasons. I doubt this is going to change, but I'm really curious to see if whoever didn't vote for Ichiro steps up and says who they were. But let me know what your thoughts are on this. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention to the NFL. The coaching carousel continues to spin. The Jets have found their head coach. We'll talk about who it is, if it was a good hire, and give it a letter grade coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the Hall of Fame inductees for the 2025 class of the MLB. In this segment, we turn our attention back to the NFL. Some coaching carousel news continues to come around as we get ready for the NFL championship weekend. We have a new head coach being hired, this time in New York. Just 5 spots remain after Aaron Glenn is picked to be the next head coach of the New York Jets. We'll talk about that hire, what it means for the rest of these openings, and whether or not that was a good decision. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, January 22nd. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Jets hiring Aaron Glenn as their next head coach. Aaron Glenn, of course, the former defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, was there for 4 years, had a really good year this season as a coordinator, has been on some of the short lists as an upcoming name, the next guy in the NFL for quite some time. He finally gets his opportunity, this time with the team that he played for as a player, the New York Jets. He also started his coaching career over there with the New York Jets, so he is definitely familiar with that building, which is a plus over there, and it seemed like something that the Jets were trying to get. Obviously, their other major candidate, a guy that was seemingly like a favorite for a while, was Rex Ryan, a guy who used to coach there, took them to multiple AFC championship games while he was a coach. with Mark Sanchez, they decide to go with a guy that emerged as a very strong contender in Aaron Glenn, a guy that I didn't think they would have the opportunity to. Aaron Glenn is one of the best coaches available in this coaching cycle. It goes his former teammate or coaching staff mate in Ben Johnson, the former offensive coordinator for the Lions, who went to the Bears this offseason, and now the other coordinator for the Lions, Aaron Glenn, probably was the second biggest name that was out there, at least under consensus. He was getting a lot of different interviews. He was supposed to go down to New Orleans today to interview with the Saints. I bet you if he got there, the Saints would have made him an offer as well, but a snowstorm delayed his visit, and the Jets, I'm sure they're very excited about that because they did not want him to get out of the building. Instead, he gets a 5-year contract to rebuild this Jets team. Now, I'm not sure how he's going to handle it. His press conference obviously is going to take place tomorrow in New York as they work out the details of the contract, but a 5-year deal for him. The big question surrounding him with the Jets is not how he's going to do it defensively, because he's a good defensive coordinator. He's a guy that's going to bring energy, and that is a very talented Jets unit, at least defensively. Offensively, the question is, what is the plan with a guy like Aaron Rodgers? And we'll get answers on that tomorrow, because that's going to depend how this coaching staff and how this regime starts and finishes, really. If the Jets are pushing him to build with Aaron Rodgers for a year or two and then start a rebuild, or start a rebuild now, it's a much different outlook for how this season goes. Obviously, they give him that 5-year contract, which makes you think they want him to be there for a long time. They want him to be able to see through a rebuild, which makes me think maybe they're moving off of Aaron Rodgers. But even if they decide not to, a 5-year deal would let him kickstart a rebuild even after Aaron Rodgers plays 1 to maybe even 2 more seasons with the New York Jets. Aaron Glenn, again, I love his energy. His defensive schemes aren't the most creative out there. He's not a guy that's going to bring these crazy exotic blitzes like a guy like Brian Flores is, or a Bill Belichick, who is a defensive genius. He's just a guy that can relate to his players. He's a guy that can get the most out of them, a player's coach, which is something that's very important, especially with a Jets team that was not buying in last season. They were dejected. The coaching staff couldn't get them up for the games when they needed them to, and that is something that really showed in their game plan. That's something that really showed in how that season went. Obviously, it's a lot easier to get your guys going and ready to play when you're winning football games. But this is a guy in Aaron Glenn who always has great energy on the sideline. His players clearly love him. This is a Detroit coaching staff that is just getting pilfered right now. The defensive line coach is going to Detroit as well. This is just a mess over there, right? This is a Lions coaching staff that's going to have to be rebuilt as well, which is something to keep an eye on for a Lions team that has been so dominant over the last couple of years under Dan Campbell. I'm curious how that is going to go. But the Jets hiring Aaron Glenn, he came as a bit of a surprise to me. Now, he emerged as a strong favorite, and we reported on it yesterday that the Jets did not want him to leave the building. The Jets wanted to sign him yesterday, if at all possible. Instead, they wait until today. They're able to get that deal done with him. A 5-year deal is huge. He's not a guy that, again, is going to blow you away with scheme. He's a guy that's going to get the best out of his players, and that showed a lot in this Lions organization this year, especially that Lions defense that lost 15 guys, starters from week 1. They were down to 3rd string, 4th string guys in the playoffs, and sure, he didn't have his greatest performance in the playoffs against the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels, but he was able to get everything he needed out of his guys, down 5 DBs at one point in that playoff game, and that defense, give them credit. They played their hearts out, and they played for their coach in Aaron Glenn, who gets an opportunity to finally be a head coach. I think you would have gotten one anyway with the Saints. The Jets were able to pop on it. But now this asks a question of what the Saints are going to do, right? Because the Saints, in my opinion, were going to go and get a guy like Aaron Glenn. Maybe a guy like Mike McCarthy finds a job now. Maybe a guy maybe a retread comes through. Maybe they go out and they go get a name like Pete Carroll, whose name has started to heat up in circles around the NFL with the Raiders especially. but this brings a lot more questions than answers. Again, it's a big old domino. Once one piece falls, as we see, more and more pieces are starting to go, because you don't want to be that odd one out. You don't want to be that team that is just left in the dust, can't find their coaching candidate because everybody else already swiped them up when the iron was hot, right? So instead, all of these coaches are starting to get hired now. I expect of the remaining 5, a good amount of them to be filled by the end of this week, or at least before the Super Bowl. The Saints probably will fill it soon. The Cowboys, sound like they are going to fill that spot up soon, looking at their current offensive coordinator. The Jaguars are in the middle of scrambling right now, and we'll get to that in our next segment. And the Raiders probably wait a little bit longer, because I'm not sure they're looking at a lot of the same candidates as other people. But I think we start to get a lot of head coaching news coming in the next couple of weeks. So look out if your team needs a head coach, because I think you're going to find your guy coming up real soon. And this is the best time of the coaching carousel, right? Right in the prime time of the NFL playoffs, we get to talk about all of these coaching news. But overall, I like the hire. It's not a slam dunk hire. It's not an A+ like the Ben Johnson hire was for the Bears. This is going to be one that takes a little bit of time. They're going to be a bottom feeder for a sec, but if the Jets front office and that organization has some patience, if that Jets front office and organization gives Aaron Glenn the time and the resources that he needs to build a winner and just deal with some suckage for a little while, this could be very, very successful for them. For now, I'm going to give them a cautiously optimistic B. The Jets haven't had a lot of success with their head coaches in the past, but overall, I think this was a pretty solid hire, and it's hard to go wrong with a guy who everyone seems to love, especially up in Detroit and New Orleans, where he came from before. But let me know what your thoughts are on this hire. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we dive a little bit deeper into some of the other coaching news. Some GMs got hired and fired today. We'll talk about why that happened and what's going on with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the Jets hiring of former Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. In this segment, we talk about the other major news from around the coaching carousel. The Jaguars fired their GM Trent Baalke after 4 seasons amidst a head coaching search. That's a big piece of news that I think is really important for why the Jaguars have been unable to find their real head coach that they want for a while, as well as a GM being found with the Raiders. We'll talk about that in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, January 22nd. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Jacksonville Jaguars whole situation. The Jags today announced that they're parting ways with GM Trent Baalke. Trent Baalke came over after a couple years off of being the GM for the San Francisco 49ers. He heads over to the Jaguars and has been there for the last 4 years. The Jaguars, over that course, have scared off a lot of those top coaching candidates. They ended up with Doug Peterson last coaching cycle where they were hiring, and he was a guy that was not one of those top coaching candidates. People were not wanting to go and interview with the Jaguars. We didn't know why then, but now today, before the firing of Trent Baalke, reports were that Liam Cohen, who was the favorite, presumably the Jags were going to offer him a contract, decided to stay at his offensive coordinator position with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and withdraw his name from the consideration of the Jacksonville Jaguars head coaching pool. And that was a huge blow. There was a lot of speculation as to why, and I think a huge reason is because of how restrictive the GM Trent Baalke is. He obviously has a vision here. He's the one that drafted Trevor Lawrence. He's the one that paid Trevor Lawrence, and he's the one that is trying to build a team around Trevor Lawrence. He's been with 2 different head coaches at this point. Obviously, the failed experiment that is Urban Meyer, the Doug Peterson era that was a little bit successful, ultimately ended in failure. And now they're looking for a new guy. They were trying to lure in the top candidates, a big offensive name like a Ben Johnson. He chooses the other quarterback that's hot on the market right now in Caleb Williams. Then they go for the next offensive guy, the next big guy that I would have turned to if I couldn't get option number 1 on the offensive side of the ball, that being Liam Cohen. Liam Cohen, who no one else really seemingly was going to hire, takes his name out of consideration and is now going back to the Tampa Bay Bucks on one of the biggest contracts ever given out to an offensive coordinator. They did a good job of keeping him around. I love that for the Bucks. He's a really good offensive coordinator and a great offensive mind. But that would have been a great hire for Trevor Lawrence and the Jags. Instead, super late into this cycle, they fire their GM. This is an organization that is lost at this point. They needed a hard reset, and I was going on the Raiders about firing their GM late, but on the same day that the Raiders hire their GM, the Jags fire theirs. They are way too deep into conversations now to restart a hiring cycle like this. The top GM candidates have interviewed almost every single place. A couple of them have already been hired. The Titans hired a GM. The Raiders hired a GM. And now the Jaguars have moved off of Trent Baalke on January 22nd, when coaches are being hired, when the championship games are set to be played in just a couple of days. That is not a good look for the organization. Maybe this is something that has held them back, but I can't imagine they get anybody but a tired old retread. Maybe a guy like Mike McCarthy comes in for this coaching staff now, but they need to find a GM. Maybe it attracts some guy that really wants to have more control in the organization, but I can't imagine this being any more than a rental coach, especially this late in the cycle, because it's going to be a lot of work. You're going to need to find a pairing that is just not hastily thrown together. This is a mess of a front office right now, and it shows how deep the ineptitude can go sometimes, right? Trent Baalke was a guy that probably should have been let go a couple years ago. Some bad draft picks, although some of it can be blamed on coaching staff decisions like Urban Meyer. Some of it can be blamed on a guy like Doug Peterson, but I think he should have been fired in this offseason. Instead, he holds on all the way until basically February, and now it puts the Jags way behind the 8 ball. They need to find a GM. A lot of people like to find that GM before picking a head coach. Sometimes they do it the other way around, depending on how much power you want each of those to have. But at this point, it's just going to be a mess. Your top candidate, assumedly, was Liam Cohen. He drops out, assumedly, because he didn't like Trent Baalke's vision. Trent Baalke then gets fired in response to that, and now they're back to square -1. Not even square 0, square -1. They need a coach, they need a GM, and they're not going to get top candidates for either of them. Like I said, all the other GM spots have already started interviewing, have already been filled in a couple of exceptions. I just don't see this working out for the Jaguars any kind of way. This is a team that's going to be lost. They're going to be bad for a long time. It's already hard enough to get free agents to come to Jacksonville. You've paid Trevor Lawrence a lot of money. He is your quarterback that you've committed to. This is a team that is kind of stagnant right now, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon, especially with all the concerning news that is coming out of Jacksonville in the last couple of days. But let me know what your thoughts are on any of this. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the NBA. The midseason power rankings are here. We'll go 1 through 30, go through every single team, and talk a little bit about how they got here. That's coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the total debacle of a situation that is currently going down in Jacksonville after getting shut down by presumably their number one option left at the head coaching position. They have let go of GM Trent Baalke. Now, in this segment, we turn our attention away from football and into the realm of basketball. The NBA has reached its little more than halfway point. We're going to go through the halfway point power rankings for all 30 teams as the shape of the NBA season really starts to form a little bit clearer in our heads here. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will go to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, January 22nd. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the NBA power rankings here. At number 30, of course, it's the Washington Wizards. By far the worst team in basketball. The best thing you can say about them is they have a lot of young guys getting a lot of chances to get in the game. This is not a team that is looking to be successful at any point this season. They obviously had the second overall pick in this year's draft in Alex Sark. He won Rookie of the Month last month. Some positives over there. Bilal Coulibaly has looked pretty good in spurts. Keyshawn George has been 50-50 as a shooter, but they've got a couple of young guys that you could see potentially making a big step. They're going to have very good lottery odds, and that's going to be very important for them to hit on their pick this year because that is going to determine what direction this franchise goes in the future if they continue this downward slope or they start to climb their way out of this canyon that they found themselves in for quite a long time. At number 29, we have the Utah Jazz. This is just a Jazz team that isn't very exciting. They've got a couple of young guys. They've traded away a lot of their stars. They're starting in the middle of their rebuild right now. They've got a couple guys to build around, but this overall is just not a very good team, and I don't see them turning it around super quickly. They've still got to get a couple more pieces before they start that upward trek again. At number 28, we have the Raptors. Just a down year for them. They've got a lot of the pieces there. Scotty Barnes is playing like an all-star again, although he's probably not going to get in because the team has been so bad, whether it be because of injuries or because of just their team not being up to snuff right now. They've got a couple pieces that they need to find before they can really take that next jump. I thought they'd be a little better than this. I thought they'd be fighting for a play-in spot this year, but instead they're in the basement of the league, looking for the potential number 1 overall pick. At 27, we have the Trailblazers. A little bit of a step up for them, right? This is a Trailblazers team that has seen some bright spots from some of their young stars. Scoot Henderson has shown a lot more growth than he had last season. It still hasn't been great for this team, but there's a lot of young guys that are showing a little bit of growth, and that's all this team needed this year. They were not expecting to be competitive. They're down here at 27. At 26, it's the Nets. They were doing a little bit too good, so they traded away a couple of their guys. Now they're getting back to where they need. They've still got some guys that can absolutely shoot the ball. They put the ball in the net some nights, and some nights that's just what's going to happen. Injuries are starting to hurt this team, but this team is kind of where they wanted to be. They were tanking this year. They traded for some of their own picks back, and this is a Nets team that's still chilling over there in the basement at number 26. At number 25, we have the Pelicans. They're starting to get a little bit more healthy. They got Zion back soon, maybe. But this is a Pelicans team that, as they get a little more healthy, is going to show why they could potentially make a run for the play-in tournament. It's a tough Western Conference this year, and they're probably not going to be able to do it with all the setbacks they had early in the season. But they're a better team than their record shows. They're just dealing with a lot of very important injuries right now, so they're at 25. At 24, we have the Charlotte Hornets. Same thing can be said about them. Young stars starting to show a little bit, but again, just overall, this team is not good enough. The Sixers are an enigma this year at 23. They thought they were going to be competing for a title in the East, at least a finals appearance. Instead, they're fighting to make it to the playoffs right now. Joel Embiid and the rest of that team has been really injured, but still, they need to be better than this. The 76ers have been super disappointing. The Bulls at 22 and the Spurs at 21. The Bulls and the Spurs are going in opposite directions. Victor Wembanyama at 21 continues to get better. They're in France right now playing a 2-game set over there versus the Pacers. That should be fun to watch. The Bulls have a couple of young stars. Kobe White has been really good. Vucevic has been good this season. I'm curious what they do at the deadline. They probably should be sellers, but the histories of this Bulls team makes me think they're not going to do that. At 20 and 19, we have the 500 teams, the old teams, the Suns and the Warriors. These teams are old. They are struggling to stay relevant, and this is just what Father Time catches up to you. This is what it looks like. The Suns have made some moves to try and make a move at the deadline. I'm curious if they're going to be able to pull it off. They've been very vocal about trying to compete with this roster that they've built. The Warriors and Steph Curry's still been amazing, but that team has really fallen off since their red-hot start to the season. And again, time just catches up to some teams, and unfortunately it's catching up to two of the greats in this game. Not really to them, but to their teams around them. At 18, we have the Magic. They're just dealing with too many injuries. This team is really good when they're healthy. They're probably a top 10 team. Instead, they've dealt with way too many injuries, season-ending injuries to some of their best players. They're getting a couple guys back, but it's just not enough. A little too late. Maybe they can make the play-ins, make the playoffs, but in a weak Eastern Conference. But this is just a waste of a year, unfortunately, for a team that has been really good when healthy. At 17, the Hawks, another one of those teams that just kind of hanging around, right? They beat a lot of really good teams early on in the season. They lost to some bad teams. Trae Young is having a really good year. I love what he's doing over there, but overall, this Hawks team is just a little bit disappointing. It doesn't have that punch that you might expect them to have this year. 16 is the Timberwolves. Again, they made a bad trade at the beginning of the season. Dante DiVincenzo goes down for injury. He's out indefinitely. That hurts. Anthony Edwards, awesome. He has become a high-volume three-point shooter. He's shooting over 40% from deep, and that is huge. If he can continue that as they get better, this team could get back to the highs that they were last year. Unfortunately, a bad trade just doesn't work out for them. Julius Randle has not been that kind of piece that they needed to replace Cat, and it's going to be a not great season for them the way out. Maybe they can find a way in the playoffs because Anthony Edwards is playing like a man on a mission right now. He's a one-man wrecking crew on that team. 15, we have the Pistons. Cade Cunningham has played out of his mind lately. The Pistons have been red hot recently, and they might find their way in the playoffs. One of the best season-to-season improvements that we've seen in a very long time in the NBA. It's a very similar roster. They just had time and better coaching to be able to get their guys out there, and I'm very impressed by the Pistons this year. I did not think they would be this good. The Heat at 14 are dealing with their own issues, right? Jimmy Butler announced today that he is suspended for 2 more games. They're probably going to trade him. I don't know. He's asked for a trade 3 times now. I don't know how the suitors are looking. It feels like the Suns are bulking up to go and get him. I don't know how it's going to go there. They've had a couple rookies step up. As always, it's been a shared success without Jimmy Butler, which is just the Heat culture for you, and that's cool to see. At number 13, we've got the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks are dealing with a lot of injuries themselves. Derek Lively goes down for 2 to 3 months at this point, but they've been surviving. They've been doing their best. I just need to see this team get to the playoffs, and I need to see them get healthy before I really start to believe in them. The Lakers at number 12. LeBron James is the second player in the history of the NBA to put up a triple-double when he's 40 or older. LeBron James is doing amazing things. He's the best basketball player in the history of the game, and it's really cool to watch him do his stuff. The Lakers are going to make a playoffs. They're not going to be super dangerous there. They just don't have what it takes to compete for a title this year, and they're not going to go make that big trade either. They don't have the assets for it, so they're just going to be a good team to ride out LeBron James's career, kind of like the Warriors and the Suns, just with a little more oomph. At 11, we have the Kings. They've been red hot since firing their coach. Turns out that puts a little pep in the step of your players. They've been one of the hottest teams in all of basketball since then, and I'm really curious to see how long this lasts. It doesn't seem like this team has the recipe to make a deep run in the playoffs, especially, again, in a very strong Western Conference. But with the way they're playing right now, they could find their way to at least a playoff spot and maybe make some noise over there if they continue to be this hot, because they've beaten some of the better teams in the West recently. Getting into the top 10, the Pacers have really turned their season around. They've started to figure it out. They started slow, but once they got it going, this is a Pacers team that can keep up with a lot of the best teams in the NBA. The Clippers at 9 have completely shocked me. They've been the good shock of the season. Kawhi Leonard came back for them. That's what they were waiting on this season, right? James Harden did a great job holding the fort down. The offseason pickups that I've really trashed them for have been amazing, and hats off to the Clippers. They've been awesome all season. Giannis has completely turned this Bucks team around at number 8, and they are now in position to be potentially hosting a playoff game, hosting a playoff round, in the Eastern Conference this year. The Nuggets at 7, as long as they have Jokic, they're going to continue to be up here. I have a lot of concerns about this team without him, though, so they're only here at 7. The Knicks at 6, I like this Knicks team a lot. I love what Cat's been able to add to this team offensively. Once they get Mitchell Robinson back, they'll have a true big under there, and I can't wait to see if Tibbs gets a 6-man rotation going potentially, because this is a really, really good Knicks squad. It just needs a little bit of size and some defense in the paint, and Mitchell Robinson can absolutely provide that. At number 5, getting into the top 5, the Rockets. They are potentially the second or third best team in the West right now. That is a young core that's playing very well together. I really like this Rockets team. Their defensive effort is incredible, and this is a Rockets team that, again, kind of came out of nowhere. I thought they'd be good. I thought they'd make a run for the play-ins, but being the number 2 seed in the West is nothing to scoff at, especially this late into the season. Hats off to the Rockets. They've been amazing. At 4, I've got the Memphis Grizzlies. I love what Ja Morant has been able to do this season. him and a lot of the rookie class, a lot of the young guys have really turned this Grizzlies team around. They're healthier, they're ready to go, and I think they're a very dangerous team in the West this season. At 3, we have the Boston Celtics. Same old Celtics. They're going to be awesome. They've got a really good team. They're starting to heat it up again, and they're going to be really dangerous when it comes to the playoffs. I'm curious if they get that number 1 seed, though, because they have competition in the East this year, unlike last year. At number 2, it's those Cavaliers. The Cavaliers have been amazing, in a word, right? They've only lost 1 time to a team in the Western Conference, and that is, of course, the Thunder. The Thunder have been the best team in basketball. The Cavaliers are going to have 3, potentially 4 All-Stars out of the East. It's going to be really cool to see, and I love what Kenny Atkinson has done with that team. And of course, number 1, that leaves the Thunder. The Thunder are the best team in basketball. They have the best defense. They've got an army of guards, and they're going to get even better when their reinforcements comes. They have no bigs right now. Chet is down. Your other center in Isaiah Hartenstein is down. This is a team that desperately needs some size, and they're going to get it back soon, and then they're going to get even better than they are right now. They're the favorites. Shea is the favorite to win the MVP this year, and for good reason. The Thunder are the best team in basketball, and it really is not that close. But let me know what your thoughts are. Who's your top 10 in the NBA? I'd love to hear it. Go ahead and throw it in the comments. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we discuss the trade that was made in the NBA last night between the Suns and the Jazz. What this means, what they're setting up for. We'll talk about that in just a second. Coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the NBA power rankings as we've reached just about the mid-season point. At this segment, we're going to finish off our show with a little bit more NBA talk. A trade took place last night between the Jazz and the Suns, a very interesting one that has a lot of intriguing ideas coming off of it. We'll talk about what that trade is and what it means for those two teams in just a second. But before I do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, January 22nd. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our fifth and final segment of the show. The Jazz and Suns have made a trade as the trade deadline approaches, just about 14 or so days away at this point, a little over 2 weeks. We have a trade that sets the Suns up to do a lot of really interesting things. The Jazz had a lot of extra first-round picks from their Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trades. So they packaged 3 of those later picks, the worst of a 2025, a 2027, and a 2029 pick between the Cavs, the Warriors, and the Wolves. And they got a 2031 unprotected pick from the Suns. Now, the Suns most likely are not going to be very good in 2031. Now, we can project 6 years out. We have no idea. But based on that roster right now, it's an older roster trying to hold out. I doubt in 6 years this is going to be a roster that's really going to be putting great teams together. Now, anything can happen in the draft. Anything can happen in the next 6 years in the NBA. So you never really know. But I think this is an interesting trade for the Jazz. They get a presumably better pick, and they move off of 3 first-round picks. But for the Suns, it's a little bit more interesting, right? The Suns have been in a lot of different trade talks or trade speculations this season, whether that be trading away guys like Kevin Durant, like Bradley Beal, or trading for guys like a Jimmy Butler out there that's having his own issues with the Miami Heat. This is one where they reload a little bit. They were a little bit lacking on those first-round picks after making trades for Bradley Beal, making trades for Kevin Durant to pair them next to Devin Booker. This is a team that really has not worked out, whether because of injury or age or fit with those 3 guys, or not really having the money to build a roster, a competent roster around them. Now they go out and they get those extra resources. They're trying to add that next star. And I think this is signaling that they didn't have enough to go out and get whoever they wanted to get, whether that was Jimmy Butler or whether that was someone else that they really thought could make that next big step. Now, they've traded for a center already. They've tried to shore up their defense a little bit from the Hornets, but 3 first-round picks to play with a little bit makes it a lot more interesting. It makes them not have to give up one of those big 3 necessarily to go get a guy that's super disgruntled from the Miami Heat, a guy that the Heat keep suspending, and one that I expect them to trade very soon in Jimmy Butler. It makes it seem like his prime location is going to be the Phoenix Suns, whether or not he gets that extension. If he goes to the Suns, I doubt he'll get that extension. They just don't have the money to give it to him. But this makes it more likely that we get a team like the Suns trading for Jimmy Butler. Maybe they're loading up to try and make a big swing at someone else, but I think Jimmy Butler is going to end up being a Sun, and getting those extra first-round picks, again, just gives them some flexibility. It allows them to play with those first-round picks without breaking the trading rules, which are just arbitrary and super confusing in the NBA, like no other league is. But I do like this trade for both sides. The Jazz have to give up a little bit to get probably a really good unprotected pick, and they give up a bunch of later round picks. Not too bad for the Jazz in this situation, and it's just more ammo for the Suns to go out and make a move. So it's a mutually beneficial kind of thing, and I like this move for both parties. Obviously, it depends on what the Suns end up doing with it. If they get stuck with these picks, I mean, it's a first-round pick, so you can't really go too wrong with it, but this seems like a win-now kind of move, load up to get some assets, so I'm curious what the next step is with these picks being packaged over to them. But let me know what you think. What do you think is going to happen now that the Suns have a couple more first-round picks in their back pocket and a little more flexibility to make some moves? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back tomorrow talking about all the things that happened in the world of sports. I can't wait to see you then. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.